welcome to the June the 28th, 1993 taping of It Happened in Grand Prairie, as we bring you the history of our city and introduce you to some of the people that have caused that to happen. And this is our history tape number 201. And we are almost wiped out today. We have such an illustrious group for this history tape. And we're going to start on my immediate right, on our front row. For the very first time, we're using a tiered presentation, for we have such wonderful guests today. Our first person to introduce is former superintendent, retired, having fun square dancing and fishing, but did come back with us today to talk about a subject dear to his heart, Mr. Hobbs Williams. Welcome, Hobbs. We're glad to have you with us.
It's good to be here, Ruthie. Yes.
And on the front row next to Mr. Hobbs Williams is Mr. J.W. And if anyone in town called him J.W., he probably wouldn't even shake hands with you. Pappy Sneed. Pappy, we want to welcome you to the set today, young man. Glad to have you with us. And we're going to let our viewing audience know in a few minutes exactly what each of you had to do with the subject that we're talking about. And next we'll start on the gentleman just behind you, Mr. Don Murphy, who is the athletic director, head honcho for the Grand Prairie ISD in sports and everything that relates to it. Welcome, Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson.
We're so glad to have you with us.
My pleasure.
And seating next to Mr. Murphy is Mr. Carlisle Smith, Jr. And Mr. Carlisle Smith is here. He is a past state representative. He's been a mover and shaker in our community for many long years, but was associated with this project through his late father in a very special way. Welcome, Carlisle.
Thank you, Ruthie. Very happy to be here.
Yes. And seated next to Carlisle to his immediate left is Mr. Vernon A. Jackson. Now, Mr. Vernon A. Jackson is a very good friend of your speaker, in that we've been married almost 49 years, and he's also a past board member of the Grand Prairie ISD and a past school board member, and related to the time frame that we're going to be talking about it today. Mr. Vernon Jackson, we're delighted we got you away from your work today.
Very pleased to be here, Ruthie.
Wonderful, wonderful, very pleased indeed, and you should see the list that goes underneath that. And seated next to Mr. Jackson is a very special young man that came in from down at the Whitney area that has been a mover and shaker in Grand Prairie in the past relating to the Great Southwest Industrial District, a builder, a mover of things, and that's Mr. Jack Meadart. And Mr. Meadart, we're delighted to have you with us. Welcome.
Glad to be here, Ruthie.
Great. All right. Very, very soon, we hope to be celebrating the approximate 40th birthday of a very special site in Grand Prairie, Texas. Now, for a historical site to receive a state marker, it must be at least 50 years old, and generally 100 years old unless it has special significance. The special significance of the Gopher Bowl, it is named the Gopher Bowl even though it is shared with the Warriors very generously, because it is now the Gopher Warrior Bowl, but we're going to be celebrating the original Gopher Bowl anniversary, hoping to get a Grand Prairie significant landmark for that. So we're doing our documentary homework right now, and we're going to begin, first of all, I think we ought to begin with Mr. Don Murphy, who has come on the scene lately, but is responsible in the sense of the word for not only the Gopher Bowl, but all of the activities that take place in that. Mr. Murphy, would you look out into your camera and let us hear from you a little something about the significance of the Gopher Bowl and how excited you are about it possibly getting a Grand Prairie significant landmark.
Certainly, Ms. Jackson, we feel the Gopher Bowl is one of the finest football stadiums in the Metroplex, and probably of its kind in the state of Texas. We have got through the years we've had several schools come in a playoff situation and be involved in football games there in the stadium, and we get a lot of compliments on the football stadium. I think it's sort of a unique stadium in that the crowd is very close to the playing field, and it's like kind of being right on top of the football game. So we feel like that the Gopher Bowl is certainly one of the finer facilities in the Metroplex, and it may not be the newest, but we know from talking to our opponents and certainly others that's been involved there in games that it's one of its kind, and certainly enjoyed by all that visit the Grand Prairie and the Gopher Bowl.
Next, I think we'll skip around a little on this dais today and bring you Mr. Hobbs Williams, sitting to my immediate right. Mr. Williams, you came in from the lake too, and we're just so glad that you stopped all of those wonderful retirement activities. Tell us your excitement about the Gopher Bowl and maybe some of your experiences in that.
I don't think many of my experiences in the bowl you want to hear about. The bowl, when it was built, and the concept of the bowl, it was one of the first attempts at a bowl at the high school level in the state. Kind of amazed everybody from that standpoint that that type of construction would be attempted. Of course, the fact that the bowl was an ideal situation for the land that we had there, which part of it was a nice big draw, which helped a lot, except that it has constantly had some water under it, and caused us some bank problems in the past. But the bowl has been one of the best facilities, I think, that this district has ever had, and certainly one of the best high school facilities in the state.
And as the former principal, not only former superintendent of the Grand Prairie ISD, but as a former principal of Grand Prairie High School, weren't you pretty proud when you went to state meetings, a principal of a school that had such a wonderful facility, if you could just get your football team to work with it?
Well, that was always a pleasure too, because people may not know where Grand Prairie was, but knew where the Gopher Bowl was.
Yes.
And people in San Antonio even would talk about the Gopher Bowl, and a lot of people came in here from all over the state to see it, see the type of construction it was after it was built. And as Don said, we've had a lot of people come by in playoff games and this type of thing. It has created an awful lot of interest in the community from that standpoint.
I think it's brought lots of visitors, helped our economic development and sales tax in Grand Prairie, hasn't it?
I suspect that it has.
All right. Let's go to the back portion of our interviewees. And Mr. Vernon Jackson, former school board member, former president of the board, elected to the school board, and I researched this the other day, Mr. Jackson. You were elected to the board in 1955.
Right.
That was a long time ago, wasn't it?
Right.
All right. Tell us a little bit about coming on brand new onto the board in 55 and having to face your constituents with digging a big hole up there on the side of the high school grounds and spending money.
Well, I'd like to give Mr. H.H. Chambers a good word. He was one of the greatest educators, I think, ever came to Grand Prairie, and he was the superintendent at that time. And quite frankly, he gets all the credit, as far as I'm concerned, for building the Gopher Bowl. I was fortunate enough to be elected to the board in 55, and I did enjoy being on the board whenever they built the board, and it's a real honor to me to be here today and just be a part of this group here, because we have so many illustrious people that was associated with the board at that time, or the school system. I'd like to mention also the board members at that time. As far as I know, I'm the only living board member that was on the board during this time, and that's quite a blessing to me. And excuse me, I kind of feel like that I'm speaking for that great group of people that's deceased. And I just want to say that one of the highlights that I remember about the Gopher Bowl was Mr. Chambers said the only thing about it, we built the Gopher Bowl right here by that big highway that runs out there by it, and people think that that's part of the Arlington State College system whenever they look at that beautiful Gopher Bowl. Of course, he kind of said it with tongue-in-cheek, but we were very proud of it, and we still are, Ruthie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jackson. All right, let's go to Mr. Carlisle Smith, Jr., because we're getting down from the school board now down to the park where you had to have an architect and get this show on the road. And before we get to Mr. Meadart, we'd like for you to lay a little groundwork for us, so to speak, Carlisle. And I know that you are going to also speak as one of the students that played in the Gopher Bowl. We'd like for you to talk now a little bit about the architectural portion of that, and a salute to your dad and to Marshall Waters Sr. for all of their assistance in that.
Thank you, Ruthie. As you know, my dad was more the architectural end, and Mr. Warder Sr. was the engineering end of our firm at that time, and this was really a heavy engineering project more than an architectural affair. So Mr. Marshall Warder Sr. was really the lead principal in that effort. As Hobbs mentioned, he called it a draw. I would call it just a gigantic drainage ditch, was what I remember it as a student, because we could only wander so far on the Grand Prairie High School campus without falling in that ditch. We didn't go behind the boys' gymnasium at that time. We stayed away from that because it was a fairly wild area. I'm real happy that you have Mr. Meadart here, because he's going to be able to confirm something that Mr. Warder Sr. always bragged about. And that was that there was not one square or cubic foot of dirt that was moved on or off that site, that stadium was built exactly perfectly balanced. All of the dirt that came out of that ditch was utilized to set the banks of the stadium, and it was just a wonderful opportunity for an engineer like Marshall to work on. My understanding is from some of the gentlemen that still work in our office that worked back at that time, Bill Goffinet is a resident of Grand Prairie and our chief draftsman, and he was a Cub draftsman, I guess, back then. But he said that the Andrews school district in Texas, which at that time was probably the richest school district in Texas because of the oil money out there in West Texas, was used somewhat as a model. They were not a bowl in the sense of a lower into the ground structure. They had bermed up the sides of their field and placed some grandstands there. And I believe Tarrant County Junior College might have done the same thing over there on South Loop 820 back some years ago. But as far as a sub-level bowl, I'm not too sure, Hobbs, that there are any other school districts in Texas that have that kind of a stadium. I think it is unique. But they couldn't find one for a model, so they went to one of the closest examples that they could get for a feel of what they might have, but it was considerably different from that.
And while you have the microphone, would you tell us something about the magic days when you were a Gopher on site and some of your experiences in the Gopher Bowl?
Well, I'm sort of like Hodge. I can recall some of the things I did in the grandstand of the Gopher Bowl that I wouldn't want to
put on
out
tape.
for public
I know.
information. But I do recall going to that facility and how proud our class was. We were the first class that played football in that facility.
And what was the year you played in it the first time?
It was the fall of 1956. We were the graduating class of the following 57 spring. And I do specifically recall Pete Thompson, who is also a former school board member, was the first quarterback that played in that bowl and did a wonderful job. We had a very good season that year. In fact, that was the first year that unfortunately we had been put in the district with Wichita Falls, which was the powerhouse in Texas. And I believe, Hobbs, that we went fairly undefeated in that season until we got to Wichita Falls, which was the last ball game, and we lost to Wichita Falls by something in the neighborhood of 20-7, a very respectable game, but we did not win the district that year because of that, but had a very fine season.
Wonderful. All right, let's skip now to immediately behind me, Mr. Jack Meadart, who was the contractor. And Jack, doesn't need that. He has a lapel mic and he's front and center. Tell us a little bit, would you, Jack, or anything you would like to say about your experience when they first contacted you. What did you think about the superintendent of Grand Prairie Schools calling and say, we want to build a bowl?
Well, I was very excited. Pappy Sneed and I were partners. It was me, Dart, and Sneed. And we were very excited, and we sat down when we got the plans, and we really sharpened our pencil because we wanted to build it. And we were fortunate enough to get the contract, and we built it in record time. I didn't think we could do it in that length of time.
All right, and tell us what you're doing now, Mr. Meadart.
Well, I'm not doing a whole lot of anything. Fishing a little bit, and garden a little bit, and I have honeybees. I live down on Lake Whitney.
All right, but now I want you to tell us one of your hobbies that really may help us out in our research on this Gopher Bowl. Just before you started this job, I believe you had bought a new camera. And you want to tell us about your experience of doing a historical documentary for your own archives?
Yes, I bought a 8mm camera that you had to adjust the lights and all, and I burned a lot of film, but I got a few pictures that you can make out from the start of the Gopher Bowl up until the first touchdown. And you're welcome to use them and make copies or anything any way that they'll help you.
Oh, well, we're going to take advantage of that generous opportunity, and thank you for bringing that film to us, and we already have it in our little hot hands, and we're going to really make hay while the sun shines when we get that thing put together. All right, let's go to the front row to Pappy Sneed. Pappy,
yes,
tell us a little bit about being a partner with Mr. Meadart, and when you all got together with this Gopher Bowl situation, your point of view on that.
Well, we enjoyed the work because it was a problem.
Yes.
And it keeps your mind busy.
Right.
And we could figure out things. But I didn't get to stay on the job all the time. Jack stayed on it all the time.
Now, well, what was your duty most of all when you were working together doing that?
Oh, taking care of other work too. We had other jobs.
You had other jobs that you did. Well, were you supervising the dirt moving or the building or?
No, just not exactly supervising. I'd come in and help Jack sometimes.
Oh, huh.
See, he was really in charge of the job at the time.
And you all were partners, so you were the assistant and the backup.
Yeah.
Yes. What do you think about the Gopher Bowl, Pappy?
I'm proud of it, really. Yeah, because you can tell somebody what kind of work you used to do.
Yes.
And you can say you do dirt work or construction work. I said, what kind? I said something like the Gopher Bowl. Well, they understand.
They know that that's one of the premier projects.
Yeah, and it's unusual. You hear the Orange Bowl and the Rose Bowl and all that, but they're not bowls the way I see it.
All right. Do you want to name drop your beautiful wife that's sitting in the audience today, and do you have any family that you'd like to mention, or did you have any kids play in the Gopher Bowl?
You know, I've been after her for 60 years.
Yes. You've been in Grand Prairie 60 years?
No, I've been in Grand Prairie 51.
51 years.
Came in 41.
In 41. Okay. All right.
Been a few changes.
Yes, there has. And are you proud of Grand Prairie as it is today?
I would have left if I hadn't been.
Yes, and do you still live down on Oak Street?
Same old place.
Pappy is a wonderful young man about town, and we see him any morning that we go to the Two Sisters on East Jefferson, on East Main Street to have breakfast at
I'm always busy.
6 o'clock in the morning. Always busy.
Yeah.
He was the hardest one to book on this show today, and I want y'all to know that. All right. Let's get back to Mr. Jackson. Mr. Jackson, I would like for you to talk about a little bit about the money and the budget, and what did you think? What did the superintendent think about hitting the board with a big bill like this? And did y'all have to borrow a lot of money or float a lot of bonds, or what happened?
Back in those days, we didn't borrow money. We operated on cash. And Mr. Chambers we'd get ready to pay the bills, and a fellow named Jess Holland would always ask the question, do we have the money, Prof? And he'd always say yes, and then Jesse'd make the motion to pay the bills. But the Gopher Bowl was bought with cash money, and at that time it cost $125,000 to build it. I'd like to remind us that we did do that it was built in 1956. I guess we paid for it in 56. So that was a little bit different from what the budget is today. I believe, I'm speaking strictly from memory, but I believe our entire budget in 56 was somewhere around $2 million. And we, the best of my knowledge, the budget today in Grand Prairie school system is somewhere around $60 million. So that gives you some idea about the difference in the times.
Mr. Jackson, I'd like to ask you a question. I noticed in the research that the bids came in at around $120,000, and so how did the board face the issue of coming up with this other $5,000 or whatever you were lacking to pull this up to snuff, and what did the Superintendent Chambers say about that?
Mr. Chambers told us we'd better stay on that budget if we could, because we'd sure catch flack from the taxpayers if we went over that, and we did try to stay very close to the budget, and I think we were wise to do that.
I think you were also. All right, let's get back to Hobbs Williams, past superintendent, past principal of the world. Give us some more good information about the Gopher Bowl, because I want to get back to Mr. Sneed and ask about the fool's goal that I've heard about that was down in the bottom of that cavern.
Well, Ruthie, the Gopher Bowl, there's been two projects that I know of that were finished on time or ahead of time and within the budget. That's the Boulder Dam and the Gopher Bowl. And the Gopher Bowl was probably the last construction project that came out on time and came out within the budget. If you built a Gopher Bowl today, it'd probably cost you $3 or $3.5 million, and probably you wouldn't have the type of construction, the good construction that you've got now. I'm not downgrading construction companies today, but the materials that went into that bowl are much better materials than what you can even think of getting today. The bowl's had its ups and downs. We've had an unstable bank condition, which Jack helped us stabilize some years ago with some pilings in it. We also had a slippage of the south stands. We worked that with some steel driven down in underneath the stands and stopped that slippage. But over the years it has been, and when you think of a stadium being 40, 45 years old, it's just nearly unbelievable that any structure could stand that long in that good a shape. The bowl has always been, I think, the premier graduation ceremony. It is about as pretty a ceremony as you'll ever see in graduation down there in that bowl. Having ball games in the bowl, having both sides full, is just, it makes a real beautiful picture. We've got a number of aerial shots of the bowl, but none of them could be made at night when the bowl was always full. So I wish back then that we could have had the night film that we have today, that we could have gotten pictures of that. But nonetheless, the bowl has been and is a premier facility in the state of Texas. It's got a lot of memories for a lot of people. Carlisle talking about the Wichita Falls game. Of course, you can't talk about Wichita Falls without thinking about how far it is up there when you're coming home, because you just got beat. If you went to Wichita Falls, you got beat.
And how cold it was.
It was always cold. But I remember Earl Burleson splitting a helmet down there in the bowl. Just literally hit somebody so hard he split his helmet open. Things like that. I've watched Billy Bob Stewart nearly kill people down there on the bowl floor.
And Mike Lewis?
When you think back over the years of things that have happened and experiences, and as Carlisle said, yeah, I've had to get after him for some of the things he's done in the stands, but A lot of memories in the bowl, in the building of it, and in the things that have happened since. I know in the building of it, it was a tremendous challenge, and I think Jack and them did an excellent job in the way in which they went about it. The length of time it took them to do it is unbelievable. I was remembering somewhere in the neighborhood a little bit over a year. Once they started the construction, they finished the dirt work in less than 4 months.
Wow.
And the stands were fully constructed within 6 months. So
about a year.
You cannot get that kind of construction today, can you, Carlisle?
No, I think you're right, Hobbs. That assumption of about $3 to $4 million is probably rather accurate.
Yes. All right, is there anyone on the dais that can speak to the fact that we have this water seepage? Since the Trinity River course was changed from almost immediately north of Tarrant Road when they put in I-30, did that have anything to do with that draw? Was the Trinity River near there during that time?
The water problem we've had there is related, and Jack can tell you this, there's one of the best springs in Dallas County, back up at the head of that draw. And they changed the course of that spring, but that spring, is, as far as I know, is still seeping and flooding.
Very active.
The bowl has got a tremendous drainage system, and if it didn't, there's water always in the drainage system of the bowl.
All right, Mr. Meadart. We need to talk about the Fool's Gold. We have only 2 minutes left on this interview. We need for you to put in something about some of the things that you found when you excavated, or what little excavation you did there at the Gopher Bowl.
Well, after we got down about 26 foot, we hit blue shale, and about 4 foot under that, well, there was a seam of looked like ashes, and it was full of this Fool's Gold. We all stopped and got off our equipment and started digging Fool's Gold. Thought we was getting rich, you know. And everybody loaded up on it, but I don't know what happened to mine. I kept a lot of it for a long time.
That's what they in the paper. The newspaper got a hold of it.
Yeah, they got it in the news.
Reporters out.
The newspaper got a hold of it and sent reporters out. Do you have any of the Fool's Gold, Pappy?
No, ma'am. I sure
You don't.
But another thing that was down there was some little, looked like cow horns, bull horns, formations, kind of like these things that stalactites come out of the cave.
Yes.
But they were hard when you got them. But I carried a cigar box full around the pickup for I don't know how long. But after they got in the atmosphere, they just
disintegrated.
Yeah, went away. So
well,
I wasn't going to keep them because they're funny things. They're pretty things.
Yes.
Pointy, you know, look just like horns.
Well,
How they formed, I don't know.
I want to thank you gentlemen so very much for being with us today. Is there anyone that wants to have the last word before we close out the show? Aren't you glad we're going to do this, Mr. Murphy?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. You want to encourage us along? You want to show and tell your picture, and would you hand that down so we can get the camera to clue in on that with Mr. Williams? We want to show you the Gopher Warrior Bowl as it is today. We're going to try to get a marker for it. We're going to do real good things. Now, look at that. Looks like we're right down at the bowl, doesn't it? And this is Ruthie Jackson reminding you that history is as we live and do in Grand Prairie, Texas, and especially at the Gopher Bowl.